At this hour, we expect a briefing by Democratic leadership in the Senate in about a half an hour at 12:30 Eastern. You can follow that live on cspan.org. And now to the House floor, live here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Ayman Talib Sharif, Masjid Muhammad, Washington, D.C.
Let us pray. Almighty God, the merciful, the wise, the most high possessor of greatness, we stand and humbly beseech your divine providence upon this House of Representatives. Grant them clear vision and legislative acumen as they navigate the waters of our national issues. Grant them insight and wisdom, and bless them to follow the logic to its logical conclusion. Grant them the quality of excellence in planning, both short and long term, that focuses on the right thing, the right way, at the right time. As we pledge one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, in acknowledging you, God, who created us all and cares about us all equally, bless this House to be reflective of E pluribus unum, the many diverse, wonderful, beautiful expressions of human life that have contributed to the beauty and strength of America. And bless them to have always the right perception of our nation, that first of all, this nation is a gift from you. And under you, God, we are responsible for how we treat everything. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's my distinct honor and privilege and pleasure to introduce Imam Talib Sharif today, who is the resident imam, which is simply a word that means leader, of Masjid Muhammad, which is a Washington, D.C. mosque with a 75-year history. Imam Talib Sharif is a 30-year veteran of the United States Air Force and served our country nobly in uniform for many years. And he also holds a Master's in Business Administration from the American Intercontinental University and a diploma in the area of Arabic Studies and Language from Defense University. I might also add that the Imam is a leader in the interfaith movement and regularly works with faith leaders of all faiths, building understanding, cohesion, and unity amongst all people and all Americans. And with that, I yield back, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to a former member of the House and a grand lady from Louisiana, Miss Lindy Boggs. She was a pioneer and a trailblazer for the state of Louisiana. She served Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District following the death of her late husband, Hale Boggs, who was then the majority leader of the House. She was the first woman elected to represent the state of Louisiana in Congress, and she was a founder of the Congresswomen's Caucus. In tribute to her service as a pioneer for women, the Congressional Women's Reading Room is rightfully named in her honor down the hall. Lindy was the first woman and only Louisiana ambassador to the Holy See during the tenure of Pope John Paul II. Lindy effortlessly balanced her role as a respected leader and a loving mother. She loved her city of New Orleans, in fact lived on Bourbon Street for many of her later years in New Orleans. She loved her beloved Tulane University, and in fact, just recently, she and her daughter Koki participated in a fundraiser to benefit Tulane University just a few weeks ago in New Orleans. She's somebody who will be dearly missed, and someone who we are honored to have to be able to call a former colleague of ours here in the House. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Request to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I would also like to join my colleague from Louisiana, Representative Scalise, and our leader, Leader Pelosi, in recognizing such a great and remarkable woman. It is with a heavy heart that I rise to recognize the loss of a true legend in Louisiana, Ambassador and former Representative Lindy Boggs. She was a perfect example of leadership, never afraid to fight for justice and demand equality. She took the responsibility of service seriously, addressing the plight of everyday people, and the state of Louisiana and our nation are better for it. A first-class woman who enjoyed numerous firsts and an effective legislator. She loved this body, earning the respect of her colleagues on both sides of the aisle, which is example here today with Congressman Scalise and I, and she loved her family. A role model for all of us. And it was this year we were able to, during Women's History Month, recognize former Ambassador Boggs on her 97th birthday with a tribute which was led by our leader, Leader Pelosi. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would just ask that we take a moment of silence unless the leader is going to speak and recognize the great contribution and sacrifice of a true remarkable Louisiana citizen who I think displays what's best of the best in Louisiana. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I would ask for a brief moment of silence.
Well, what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
To join our colleagues for 1 moment to pay tribute to Lindy Boggs.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlemen for the kind words that they have said about our former colleague, Congresswoman Lindy Boggs. I associate myself with their remarks, but only add that bipartisanship was the nature of how Lindy Boggs led and served in this body. When we would have our heated discussions on the floor, she would call us back and say, "Darling," Hale used to always say, "Don't fight every fight as if it's your last fight." We are all friends. We are a resource to each other to do good things for our country. No wonder a room is named for her, a room that has shared bipartisan enjoyment and participation, where we've come together as Democrats and Republicans to bring about solutions. It was referenced that we had a bipartisan tribute to her on her birthday, March 13th, and I think you would find some joy in the fact that as a devout Catholic, that was her birthday, that was when we planned to have the tribute, that was the day that white smoke went up in the chimney in Rome, and so for her birthday we could also celebrate a new Pope Francis. What better gift for her than to enjoy that on her birthday. So some of us will be in New Orleans for her service tomorrow, all of us, and our mourning and our prayers to their family. I hope it's a comfort to them that so many people loved Lindy Boggs and share their grief and are praying for them at this time. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back. Thank you.
What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Bipartisan Congressional Natural Gas Caucus convened a congressional field hearing on Friday at the Pennsylvania College of Technology in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I'm proud to have joined Representatives Gene Green, Tom Reed, and Don Marino to hear from state and local officials and leaders on the economic impacts of natural gas production in the Marcellus Shale region. The hearing offered an insightful look at the benefits of the 3,551 gas-producing wells in Pennsylvania. One of those benefits is jobs. Today, 30,752 people in Pennsylvania are employed in the natural gas industry. This is a 164% increase since 2009. The average salary, $82,643. Additionally, 214,302 are employed in ancillary industries, a 7.9% increase since 2009. In just 2 rural northern Pennsylvania counties, testimony revealed an increase of 4,832 jobs and 226 businesses between 2006 and 2012. Most importantly, 80% of those jobs are now filled by local workers. Mr. Speaker, responsible production of natural gas is producing energy security and economic impact that surpasses all expectations. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I'm calling on the Speaker to cancel or postpone the August recess until we get our work done here. As a businessman, the last thing I would ever consider doing is to giving my employees a month or 5 weeks off when we're not getting our job done. Mr. Speaker, you're the boss. You set the schedule. You put together the work agenda. And the simple truth is, this Congress is being recognized as the least productive, accomplished Congress in the history of this country. We have an appropriations bill, we have budget bills, we have the farm bill, we have immigrations, we have the President's jobs bill, we have the debt ceiling limit, we have members of Congress threatening to shut down the government, and we're going on a recess? It makes no sense whatsoever. It's time that this Congress go to work, put the subcommittees to work, go to work 5 days a week like everybody else in America, and do our job. Put America back to work. Rebuild the middle class. Get this country moving again. Mr. Speaker, cancel this recess.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a few questions. Should 16,000 IRS bureaucrats have the power to penalize the American people if they don't like your health care decisions? Will the quality of your health care depend on whether or not you support the President's political views? The IRS has already targeted conservative political groups. Will this intimidation be intensified once the IRS is enforcing Obamacare? Is Sarah Hall Ingram, the IRS bureaucrat who previously managed the Tax Exemption Department, really qualified to run the IRS Obamacare Enforcement Division? Abuse of American citizens occurred on her watch. Is anyone worried, at least a little bit, that she now oversees our health care decisions? Mr. Speaker, the IRS has forfeited any claim to impartiality and violated the trust of the American people. The IRS must not be involved in the health care decisions of ordinary Americans. On Friday, I urge you to join me in supporting H.R. 2009, the Keep the IRS Off Your Health Care Act. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman or gentlelady from Florida seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 941 days since I arrived in Congress, and the Republican leadership has still not allowed one single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. According to a new survey by the Associated Press, 80% of adults experience either prolonged unemployment, a year or more of reliance on government aid, such as food stamps or poverty-level income at least some point in their lives. That's 4 out of 5 Americans experiencing severe economic insecurity at least once. Mr. Speaker, is this the land of opportunity? The people demand a remedy. It's time to bring the American Jobs Act to the floor. It deserves a vote. The American Jobs Act prevents layoffs, invests in long-term job creation, and expands workforce training. Mr. Speaker, the mantra of this Congress should be jobs, jobs, jobs.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in defense of freedom. I rise in defense of the ideals that our founding fathers fought and bled and died for. I believe we are in a fight for the very heart and soul of our country. We know that IRS agents targeted conservative groups and individuals. No one has been held account for this. Such arrogance and impunity cannot go unanswered. We know that federal regulations are being proposed that will cost trillions of dollars and millions of jobs. These regulations are being proposed without any transparency or accountability to the people. Such arrogance cannot go unanswered. Thanks to this administration, more and more Americans believe in the idea of big government. We have Benghazi, we have Obamacare, we have the politicalization of the Justice Department, we have government snooping on journalists. The federal government was created to serve the people, and it is now standing with its boot on the necks of the people. Our founding fathers would not recognize the nation that we have become. We can change this. Join with me as we fight to overcome government abuse, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the 50% cut in the Community Development Block Grant Program in the Housing, Transportation, and Urban Development Bill currently being considered. This cut is reckless and punitive to communities in need. This year, Western New York communities are scheduled to receive a total of $22.2 million, which they plan to use to improve public infrastructure, policing facilities, and fund economic development initiatives. The bill before us cuts that funding in half to $11 million next year. Cutting community development block grant funding is completely counterproductive and will cost the country in the long term. These cuts will erode community revitalization and job creation, only adding to the financial burden on our federal budget in the long run. I urge the House to reject these cuts to our communities and defeat this short-sighted bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with disappointment because Congress plans to adjourn without addressing critical issues important to the American people. It shouldn't take a government shutdown threat in September each year to will Congress to do its job. It also should not be difficult to achieve an efficient, lean, and functional government with a real budget and appropriations blueprint. I appreciate that district work periods allow members to visit with folks back in their community, but this August, the work is too important. Unfortunately, Congress has not completed the job it needs to. It has not completed the work of the people. Too much unfinished business requires some overtime, and it begs members to stay and finish. Let's clear our schedules, vote against the adjournment of Congress for the month of August, and stay in Washington to finish the business of the people. As I was last August, I'm prepared to stay in Washington as long as it takes. These issues are too important to wait. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the deep and drastic cuts to the Transportation HUD Appropriations Bill.
In existence since 1974, the CDBG program has invested $135 billion to local communities. In this chamber, it is often said that we need to make sure that government is more efficient and reduces wasting taxpayers' dollars. Well, I am happy to report that this program continues to be one of HUD's most efficient programs, with grantees devoting on an average 94% of CDBG funds directly to efforts that provides benefits to low and moderate income families. The Republican chairperson has said cutting over $7 billion in programs was very challenging. Well, Mr. Chairman, I say if this chamber cuts these programs that provides jobs and infrastructure development, I can assure you that the children, the seniors, and the families helped by these programs will find it much more challenging dealing with $7 billion in cuts. I urge you to oppose these cuts. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address truly disturbing comments President Obama made during his hour-long speech on July 24th. He mentioned, and I quote, an endless parade of distractions and phony scandals, as if to belittle the significance of these stories. Well, there's nothing phony about the deaths linked to Attorney General's Operation Fast and Furious. Beside me is a photo of blood running through the streets of Mexico, the blood of high school students murdered by guns holders DOJ sold to Mexican drug cartels. This massacre is far from phony, Mr. President. Brian Terry, the Border Patrol agent murdered by violent criminals who holders DOJ gave the guns to, is definitely, I repeat, definitely not phony. These deaths are real. What else is real? Attorney General Holder's violation of the law and the ramifications which are far from phony. As Supreme Court Justice Brandeis said, in a government of laws, the existence of the government will be imperiled if it fails to observe the law scrupulously. If government becomes a lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for law. It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy. I ask you, has the Attorney General invited anarchy? I will continue to make my case here in the People's House, at the People's Pulpit. I will be back.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I'll request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to recognize the 48th anniversary of Medicare and Medicaid. I grew up in poverty, and my grandmother often relied on Social Security benefits, survivor benefits, to put food on the table. I know firsthand important initiatives like Medicare and Medicaid and just how important they are to seniors and families in America. No senior should have to make the choice between putting food on the table and paying for their medication. Our country's retirees have paid into Medicare their entire lives. That is why it is so critical that those who have worked hard get their earned benefits. Medicaid is critical to low-income families and individuals with disabilities that depend on the program for their basic health care needs, many of whom are struggling just to get by. I look forward to continuing to work to strengthen and protect Medicare and Medicaid to ensure that the promise of health and economic security will be there for generations to come. And with that, I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House and devise and pretend my bad marks.
Does the gentleman seek recognition for 1 minute? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last week, Texas and America energy industry lost a friend. George Mitchell, who many knew as the father of fracking, passed away last week at his home in Galveston, Texas. While his death is a sad occasion, his legacy will live on as the energy industry continues to grow and prosper. Texas now stands ranked as number 14 in the world in oil and gas production, largely due to Mr. Mitchell's innovation. Not only was George an energy innovator, he was a community builder. He was a visionary. He developed the Woodlands Master Community when many just saw it as useless swampland. Mr. Mitchell also played an integral role in reviving what I consider a precious gem in my district, the island of Galveston. George and his wife put countless hours and resources into restoring the Strand, which helped keep the island a popular tourist destination, #1 in Texas for that matter. It's important that we remember George Mitchell not only for his contribution to Texas business, but also for his zeal and tenacity to give back to the communities where he lived and worked. I'm Randy Weber, and that's the way I see it from where I sit here in America.
What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to extend and revise my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I'm proud to recognize Dr. Emily Rufo, Administrator of the Hayward Police Department's Youth and Family Services Bureau, who has been named the California School Resource Officer Association's Law Enforcement Administrator of the Year. She'll be honored with this award today at the School Safety Conference in Anaheim. She's been helping kids and families for years, joining the Hayward Youth and Family Services Bureau in 2011. Just this year, Dr. Rufo was promoted to be Administrator of the Bureau, and her work has been a great help to Hayward and the entire 15th Congressional District. The Bureau leads and offers services to youth, such as counseling to help keep kids out of trouble. For kids who have violated the law, it offers an alternative to juvenile justice to get them back on the right track. As a former prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, I've worked closely with the Hayward Police Department and know how important this program is. Dr. Rufo is rightly being recognized for her commitment and care for the children and families of the East Bay. It's people like her, willing to dedicate their careers to helping those at risk, who are helping to provide us with a brighter future. On behalf of the people of Hayward and the entire 15th Congressional District, I want to thank Dr. Rufo for her service, congratulate her on the award, and wish her all the continued success.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Washington bureaucrats are up to their old tricks again. They're interfering with how we run our businesses, dictating the type of health insurance we have to purchase, and stonewalling tax-exempt status based on political speech. Now they're going so far as to tell magicians how to do their magic shows. Let me introduce you to Marty Haney. He's an area magician from Missouri who's been doing magic shows for children in southern Missouri for over 27 years. This summer he received a chilling letter from the federal government requiring him to have a license, not for himself, but for his rabbit. The Agriculture Department is interpreting a decades-old law on animal exhibitions to now include pet bunnies used in magic shows. In order to continue conveying to children that reading is magic, he has to not only obtain a license, but also write a mandated disaster plan for his rabbit, including provisions for fires, floods, tornadoes, ice storms, and power failures. This is just another example of government overreach and loss of freedoms in our country. It's time for this to stop. It's time for common sense to prevail. It's time for big government to leave us alone. With the track record of this current administration, that really would be like pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
The gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wrote the following letter to the Undersecretary of Defense a few days ago. Just this past Saturday, I attended a welcome home event for the 1109th TASM MG of the Connecticut National Guard, who spent the last year in Afghanistan providing critical maintenance for our helicopter fleet. Their joy at being home with family was undermined with the reality that nearly a third of the 100 returning members are dual-status technicians and therefore hit by furlough. After serving in a war zone away from family, it was a bitter pill for these patriots to lose 20% of their pay almost immediately upon return. I do believe that the Department of Defense can do a better job managing the furloughs. However, the real responsibility rests in this chamber to turn off sequester. It has been 210 days since the governing Republican majority took power, 81 legislative days. We have not taken up one measure to turn off sequester during that time. Incredibly, in 3 days, we are going on a 5-week recession, and on Friday, we're going to vote for the 40th time to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I have a news flash. It's not going anywhere. We should cancel the recess. We should focus on making sure that these patriots are not treated so shabbily, and we should make sure that the 600,000 plus civilian DOD federal employees have their furloughs turned off. Cancel the recess. Let's turn off sequester. Let's stand up for America's middle class. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from Indiana seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was back in the district this weekend in Indiana, Hoosier requests were pretty simple. They said work on reforms, create more jobs, and jumpstart the economy. In addition, they said we don't trust our government. So they're tired of big government policies that are intruding in the lives of American citizens and increasing government abuse. That's why I'm proud today to co-sponsor and support bills that rein in Washington, refocus on the priorities to create jobs and protect our citizens. Every week we hear chilling reports about the Internal Revenue Service exercising poor judgment, intentionally going after American citizens. So I'm co-sponsoring the Stop IRS Act. While IRS employees are under investigation or forced to take administrative leaves, they continue to receive salaries funded by our taxpayer dollars. So I'm co-sponsoring the Government Employee Accountability Act to freeze pay and demand accountability. It's been reported that the IRS spent $50 million between 2010 and 12 to hold lavish, indulgent conferences. So I'm co-sponsoring the Stop Playing on Citizens Cash Act to stop wasting our tax dollars. These same individuals are set to lead a commanding role implementing and enforcing Obamacare. So I'm co-sponsoring the Keep the IRS Off Our Health Care Act to prevent this agency from getting their hands on our health care. Washington needs a strong dose of Hoosier common sense. I'm proud to stand with the thousands of letters and phone calls from Hoosiers and put the brakes on this reckless government.
Gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I ask the consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remind my colleagues and the American people just how important passing comprehensive immigration reform is to the growth of our economy. Study after study has shown that successful implementation of comprehensive immigration reform will strengthen agriculture, cut the deficit, create manufacturing and job opportunities, and put hundreds of thousands of Americans back to work. This will increase our country's GDP and pump billions of dollars into our economy. Here in Congress, we talk a lot about creating jobs and growing the economy, but now it is time to act. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting comprehensive immigration reform for our economy and for the future of our country. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The President's $30 billion excise tax on medical device manufacturers is bad for America. The tax is costing jobs, particularly in Indiana, and limiting patient access to life-saving devices and therapies. We should not be putting American manufacturers at a competitive disadvantage and forcing Americans to look beyond our shores for care, simply to pay for the President's broken health care law. There are more than 26,000 Hoosiers employed by the medical device manufacturing industry, and thousands more whose jobs are supported by the industry. The Indiana General Assembly has passed a resolution calling for repeal of the tax. This House should pass H.R. 523, the Protect Medical Innovation Act, to repeal the tax, preserve patient access to care, and save these Hoosier jobs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I recommend Mr. Consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to shed light on the importance of the Community Development Block Grant Program. This program provides urban communities with vital resources needed to address a wide range of community development needs, growing local economies, and improving the quality of life for low and moderate income citizens. Since the start of the program, the Community Development Block Program has invested over $135 billion in local economies by helping families, creating jobs, supporting businesses, improving infrastructure, and providing housing to many Americans who are in need. The program has provided the great state of Texas with over $60 million in direct grants this year alone, with over $28 million of those dollars going to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Funding for this program is vital to the constituents in the 33rd Congressional District. It has assisted homeowners with rehabbing their homes, providing down payment and closing cost assistance to qualified home buyers, funded public improvements, provided public services including employment training, meals, and services to the elderly. The appropriations bill up for vote this week cuts the FY13 budget for these grants nearly in half. This is the lowest level of funding in history. I urge my colleagues to vote no and save this important program.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today the House will vote on a series of bills that aim to stop government abuse. Mr. Speaker, it is extremely disheartening that the federal government has acted and continues to act in a manner that cultivates distrust. Unfortunately, there are countless examples of misconduct among the federal agencies, ranging from the IRS discriminating against conservative groups to denying American citizens their constitutional rights in administrative proceedings. Over the past month, I have heard from 1,187 of my constituents regarding their distrust in government. And as more activities of the agencies in the executive branch come to light, who can blame them? What is even more troubling than the misconduct itself is the fact that the President stands by it. Last week he called such transgressions phony scandals. These are hardly phony scandals. These are real and unconscionable actions taken by our federal government, and these actions are unacceptable, and it is past time for us to do something about it. We must take the necessary steps to start earning the trust of the American people, and that's why I back and have co-sponsored several bills in the House considered this week. They are common sense measures that work to begin restoring confidence in the American people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I did not expect to still be waiting for a vote on immigration reform in August. But here we are 48 hours from leaving town for 6 weeks, and there's been no definitive House action. Many of us will spend time with our children and loved ones, whether on vacation or just in the backyard. I urge my colleagues to think about the millions of immigrant families who are no longer able to spend time together. The mother who was deported yesterday, the sister who feared deportation and left last year, the tens of thousands who wait in line for visas, and the ones for whom there is no line available. For those who are in detention, like the Dream 9 in Arizona, and the many others who, because of their status, a trip to the hospital or getting a traffic ticket could mean they never see their children again. The American dream will end for 44,400 immigrants who will be deported between now and September 9th. I hope they are in your thoughts. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert this letter from Jarrett Paulus of Colorado and myself to the President of the United States asking for the release of the Dream 9 held in detention in Arizona and entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to this House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, President Obama says he now has serious ideas about taxes and job creation. I'd like to take him seriously, but the truth is that the President has spent the last 4.5 years hammering the nation's businesses with taxes, regulations, and Obamacare. His business mandate has already forced many small businesses to convert full-time jobs to part-time jobs. And let's remember the jobs that have already dissipated due to the medical device companies that are reducing employees to pay a new Obamacare excise tax. One company has already terminated more than 1,000 workers. As for taxes, the President's fiscal cliff deal pushes taxes up to as much as 45% for many small business owners and investors. That simply diminishes their incentive to move forward with expansions that would create jobs. So, Mr. President, if you would really like this economy to get going, let's start by repealing Obamacare and cutting taxes. Now yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Members are reminded to address all comments to the chair. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday marked the 48th anniversary of the establishment of Medicare and Medicaid.
Since Medicare was signed into law in 1965, millions of Americans have relied on the crucial programs to live their lives in dignity. And millions more who have paid into the system are counting on Medicare to one day provide them with quality health care. This historic commitment and pledge from our country is one of our greatest achievements. Seniors like my mother and those living with disabilities all understand the essential role Medicare plays in the lives of so many Americans. In April, I held a roundtable with constituents in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. They all stressed to me the importance of protecting and serving Medicare, but also on cracking down on abuse and fraud that exists in the program. I've met with people living with disabilities who rely on these benefits for their health services. As we celebrate and acknowledge the great benefits of Medicare, it is important that we reinforce our commitment to the program, even as we cut down on the waste and fraud. We must continue our fight to strengthen and enhance Medicare and fulfill our 48-year-old promise to millions of hardworking Americans across this great nation. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in favor of H.R. 2009, the Keep the IRS Off Your Health Care Act. Obamacare has proven to be a terrible law that will continue to hurt individuals, employers, and our health care system. While accurate information regarding the law has been scarce, what we know for sure is that premiums are skyrocketing, American families are confused, doctors and nurses are afraid they will not be able to continue to care for their patients. Businesses across the country are being forced to not only adhere to the erroneous paperwork requirements, but have been in a holding pattern for over 3 years waiting for implementation. Recently, we learned that the IRS has been targeting different groups and singling them out for intense scrutiny based on their political views. But as Obamacare is set to be implemented, Americans are expected to trust the IRS with responsibility of implementing this destructive law. This has proven to be unworkable and dangerous path for our health care system and our country to be on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, climate change is a long-term threat to my home state of California and to all coastal states. Climate change will increase the risk of flooding and eventual submersion of millions of Americans' low-lying homes. Mr. Speaker, I hold up this article that a group of scientists from Princeton and the University of Arizona recently published, which was a journal article that quantified state by state the coastal populations that are exposed to storm surges and sea level rise. The researchers found that in California there are more than 138,000 housing units and over 325,000 Californians living on land that is below 1 meter of high tide. And in the entire United States, there are approximately 3.7 million Americans living on land below 1 meter of high tide. Mr. Speaker, if Congress and the world does nothing, climate change will have a devastating impact on these 3.7 million Americans who are on the front line of climate change, and that number will only grow. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor with a letter from a constituent, a businessman, and I'm just reading parts of it. I did not need to read about the Obamacare health insurance tax increase that will be passed on to small business. It has already happened to my small firm. Last week, I was advised by my insurance agent that Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois is increasing my rates by more than 38%. I want to relay to you that due to a decrease in business, likely caused by uncertainty of our future, I've had to release one employee and have had advised all remaining employees that the increase in health insurance premiums will be passed on to them. I was proudly able to pay about 100% of employees' health care coverage, but after 2 consecutive 20% increases in the last 2 years and the latest 40% increase, simple business logic requires that I pass on this increase or simply go out of business. My employees will have less take-home pay under Obamacare. Does anyone in Congress realize that under this still uncertain program, it is more logical for me to shut down my business and take the subsidies on one of the exchanges than to remain open? And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 1911, the Bipartisan Student Loan Certainty Act. Last month, I urged my colleagues in this House to take up and help our students because the interest rate was going to double on July 1st. The Senate has already acted, and this week we have a chance to make things right. The Bipartisan Student Loan Certainty Act will not only reverse the July 1st student loan interest rate hike, but it actually makes things better for our students. As students around the world are acquiring higher education, masters, and training, it's imperative that our students here in this country also receive the opportunities to compete on a global scale. By making higher education more accessible, H.R. 1911 accomplishes that. When it is signed by President Obama, it will give $25 billion in debt relief over the next 6 years. It will give students the ability to lock in the interest rate for the life of their loan so they know exactly what they're going to be paying in interest, and it will save thousands of dollars and lower interest payments. I look forward to sending this bill to our President, and I yield back the balance of my time.
What purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In our Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. Years later, Abraham Lincoln called our American democracy a government of the people, by the people, for the people. What would these great men think if they saw the waste and abuse so rampant in our government today? House Republicans are committed to maintaining a government that works for the American people, not against them. That's why this week we're bringing a number of bills to the floor to do just that. We believe in an America with expanded opportunity and a more secure future for all. There's no place in that America for massive government overreach, and that's why the House Republicans will continue to fight it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair lays before the House communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. Pursuant to permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on July 31, 2013 at 9:45 a.m. that the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 2167, H.R. 2611, that the Senate agreed to without amendment House Concurrent Resolution 44. Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Pursuant to Clause 8, Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2711 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2711, a bill to amend Title V United States Code to establish certain procedures for conducting in-person or telephonic interactions by executive branch employees with individuals and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have the author of this legislation before us, a principled member of Congress who saw a problem and sought to fix it, and we brought it before you today. We brought it before you today because we hear, and hear rightfully, horror stories of harassment that includes federal officials at the IRS, the EPA, the SEC, the FEC, and a list of other ABCs. The truth is that in 39 out of 50 states, every member on a phone, every American has a right to record that conversation without asking permission of that federal officer on the other end. But in 11 states, states that most people don't know which is which, that is muddied. When a conversation occurs between 2 states, it is muddied. Ms. Jenkins, as the author of this bill, sought in principle to fix that, and I'd like to recognize her for 2 minutes to explain her bill.
The gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for his leadership on this very important issue. Whether I'm talking to Kansans back home or listening to witnesses at Ways and Means hearings, I've heard story after story of federal regulators abusing their power. What is worse, many people are afraid to share their stories of a harassment or other inappropriate behavior by government officials out of fear of retaliation. The Citizen Empowerment Act will give them certified proof and help to alleviate this fear. This bill will give Americans a new tool to protect themselves and their businesses from government overreach and abuse by expanding the rights of all citizens to allow them to record meetings and telephone conversations with federal regulators and officials. The Citizen Empowerment Act will also ensure individuals are made aware of this right by requiring government agencies to notify them of this right. Not only do federal agencies get to write rules, they get to enforce them too. In fact, a citizen is 10 times more likely to be tried by a federal agency than by an actual court. And citizens have fewer rights during agency proceedings than in a courtroom. The Citizens Empowerment Act will give Americans a tool to even the playing field with federal regulators by increasing transparency and accountability within the system. Americans deserve a government who puts its citizens first, and this is exactly what this bill does. We spend far too much time in this body debating bills to empower the government. This bill empowers Americans. Enacting the Citizen Empowerment Act and the other 9 Stop Government Abuse bills will be a positive step toward getting big government out of the way of our economy and rebuilding trust that has been broken by rampant abuse of federal power. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 2711. This legislation would have a significant impact on law enforcement, and it would interfere with laws in a dozen states. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association sent a letter to Chairman Issa and me opposing this bill. This is part of what they wrote, and I quote, "As the chair of and ranking member with jurisdiction over H.R. 2711, we urge you to ensure that the bill is not considered on the floor unless it is amended to exempt law enforcement from its provisions. Until that time, FLEOA will continue to strongly oppose this legislation," end of quote. They also wrote, and I quote, "The legislation puts law enforcement activities at risk and does a disservice to the brave men and women who are asked to put their lives on the line to protect us from terrorists and criminals," end of quote. They're not the only law enforcement organizations that oppose the legislation. The National Association of Assistant U.S. Attorneys also sent a letter opposing 2711. Here's part of what they wrote, and I quote, "The most disturbing aspect of the legislation involves its dramatically negative impact on civil and criminal law enforcement investigative efforts," end of quote. They went on to say, and I quote, "The version of the legislation approved by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform on July 24th did not contain any exceptions. Clearly, this measure raises a magnitude of administrative and legal concerns that should be addressed before the House gives further consideration to approval of this legislation, end of quote. The committee held no hearings on the legislation and heard testimony from no law enforcement officials before marking up the bill, and now it is being rushed on to the floor in record speed with apparently no regard to its consequences to law enforcement. The bill also would interfere with the laws put in place by 12 states to protect their citizens. For example, my home state of Maryland enacted a law in 1977 that made it a felony to record a private conversation unless every party to the conversation consents to the recording or another exception applies. This law was deliberately crafted to provide greater protection to Maryland residents. H.R. 2711 preempts the laws of Maryland and other states that require all parties to consent to a recording. The bill deems federal employees to have consented to a recording just by performing their official duties and does not even require that they be notified. Maryland statute requires actual consent, not forced or assumed consent. To assume a person consents to having their conversation recorded just by participating in the conversation undermines the state's laws as well as those in California, Massachusetts, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other states that require multiple party consent for recordings. Speaker, H.R. 2711 is a dangerous and poorly considered piece of legislation. I oppose this bill, and I urge all of the colleagues to do the same. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask what day it is, what day of the month it is. Mr. Speaker, is it the 31st day of July? Can you verify that for me? Because on the 24th of July, we amended this bill to send it to the House, and the ranking member knows full well, as I'm sure the National Association of Assistant U.S. Attorneys and the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association know full well. And I'm shocked that they would write, and that in fact the ranking member would write in a dear colleague, citing them, things that just aren't so in this bill. Before us today, we do not preempt states. As the ranking member rightfully so said, we make a statement on behalf of the federal government for our employees that we hereby consent that you may record us. In 39 out of 50 states, there's a little ambiguity in that Montana allows these recordings. It just doesn't broadly allow them, but it does allow recording for a law enforcement officer. But having said that, whether it's 11 or 12, no, I will not. The gentleman cited a portion of that letter from the National Association of U.S. Attorneys. But let me give you a portion that I want to make sure gets on the record. It says H.R. 2711 requires any employee of an executive agency before or at a personal interview or telephonic interchange with an individual to allow the individual to make an audio recording of the in-person or telephonic interaction. We'll let that one slide. We'll go to the next sentence. In addition, the legislation requires the executive branch employee to first provide notice to the individual of their right to make such a recording. Mr. Speaker, that's just not true. We went through a long markup, and in that markup, in the manager's amendment, we made it very clear that the only notice the federal government would give would be a notice in its publications, websites, and so on, letting Americans know that they no longer had to ask if they were in Idaho, if in fact somebody calling them from Maryland did or didn't need to know that they were recording. This interstate situation is one in which the American people deserve to know that they have a right to document when someone calls them. And if they trip up in that answer, they could go to jail or get a fine or lose their business. 39 out of 50 states recognize it, and all we're saying very clearly is the federal government gives us approval. These documents, sadly, were accurate if you looked at the bill on the 23rd of July. The ranking member knows full well these documents are somewhat inaccurate, and his own letter implies that law enforcement will somehow be crippled by having to give notice. It's just not true. In 39 out of 50 states, law enforcement would already know that somebody could be recording and not telling them. That's the law of those states. But more importantly, we're not affecting the ranking member's Maryland law enforcement. We're affecting federal officers such as the EPA, OSHA, the IRS, when they call and ask you questions, and those questions could lead to real harm to you, that you'd be able to document it. And if you're harassed, you'll be able to document it. That's what we're doing here today. We're empowering Americans to know that their federal government will never answer the question of, may I record this to protect myself? No. And in no way, shape, or form are these personal calls. This only affects when a member of our federal employment is doing their official duty and calling a private citizen. And of course, the private citizen should have the rights, and the federal government, this isn't a personal call. This isn't one in which you should expect to be able to say whatever you want. These are not private. These are public conversations. These are public investigations, and the public should have a right to protect itself, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves.